A typical rainy night. While preparing a deceased farm woman for her final viewing, I unexpectedly discovered signs of domestic violence on her body. Just as I was about to reach for my phone to call the police, her seemingly simple and honest husband suddenly burst in. He hadn't even left the funeral home? Rigor mortis has set in, and there's localized livor mortis present. Estimated time of death is no more than 24 hours. The body shows no external signs of blunt force trauma, internal injuries, or bone fractures. There's no evidence of subcutaneous bruising, and no petechiae in the eyelids. The expression is peaceful, but there are purplish cyanotic patches on the face. This largely aligns with the family's statement of sudden death due to a heart attack. Inside the private preparation room of the funeral home, I meticulously examined the deceased before me, wearing a mask, and articulated my initial analysis. I paused, waiting for a response in the quiet room. The situation was a bit unorthodox. My current actions weren't strictly within protocol. Our primary duty was to cleanse and groom the deceased, prepare their hair and makeup, and dress them in appropriate attire. We were morticians, skilled in restorative art and cosmetology, tasked with repairing any damage to skin or bones. The ultimate goal was to restore a lifelike appearance, as if the deceased were merely sleeping, alleviating the fear of death for the bereaved. If you're constantly in contact with the deceased, wouldn't you be interested in determining their true cause of death? What if someone was wrongfully murdered? These words, spoken some time ago, had unlocked a new perspective for me. They instilled a sense of purpose, beyond simply sending them off peacefully. Conducting a discreet preliminary examination of the cause of death, without damaging the body, seemed like a cautious and justified step. Your assessment is accurate. Just one minor point: facial cyanosis, those purplish patches, can also occasionally be caused by asphyxiation. Daniel's deep, resonant voice echoed in my left ear through the Bluetooth headset. Understood, Dr. Daniel, I replied. You're doing great, Emily. After the brief professional exchange, I indicated my readiness to begin the preparation. Daniel, ever perceptive, fell silent. A funeral home is a place of solemnity. Established regulations strictly forbade smiling service towards grieving families, and any form of boisterousness was prohibited during work hours. Even colleagues rarely joked. A heavy, subdued atmosphere permeated the environment. To be jovial or playful in the presence of someone's deceased loved one was deeply disrespectful, practically inviting misfortune. In a funeral home, the more solemn and serious, the better. Even a hidden smile, unseen by human eyes, might be noticed by unseen forces. It wasn't until I completed the restorative cosmetology that I realized Daniel had ended the call long ago. My intense focus had made me oblivious. Naturally, meticulous. Care for the deceased was paramount. I couldn't allow distractions, so my phone was always on silent, vibration off. Messages could only be checked afterwards. Unlocking my phone, I saw Daniel's message confirming he was heading into a meeting and had to hang up. I replied with a simple okay, then slumped back onto my workstation stool, watching as the family, a somber cluster of mourners, escorted the deceased I had just prepared away. A stray red balloon lay forgotten on the workstation, likely belonging to a little girl from the grieving family. I picked it up and tied it to a cabinet handle in the preparation room. The crimson balloon created a striking contrast against the predominantly white interior, like a vibrant spark of life amidst death. I found the visual strangely satisfying. Removing the Bluetooth headset, a thoughtful gift from Daniel. It was a cutting-edge model, non-intrusive, gently clipping onto the ear, comfortable even for extended wear, and packed with features. I often work alone, so I always wear headphones and listen to music, Daniel had explained when he gifted it. I thought you might like one too. You could try listening to music while you work, or maybe we could have voice calls while we're both working. It might make things less monotonous. Daniel was a forensic pathologist with the police department. We had been introduced by mutual friends. Our unconventional professions, far from being a point of contention, actually made us compatible. Although we hadn't met in person yet, his photos portrayed a sunny, clean-cut individual, and his manner of speaking was always polite and respectful. Rumor had it he was a prized asset to the criminal investigation team, personally scouted and recruited from medical school by the head detective, a rising star. Lost in thought, I pulled a book from my locker. The title was Forensic Case Files. It contained accounts of various death investigations, also a gift from Daniel. It had sparked a considerable interest in me, forming the foundation of my previous deductions. Perhaps, if this funeral home job ever fell through, I could even consider studying to become a forensic pathologist myself, just for fun. With just over half an hour left until closing time, I decided to spend it reading. Since receiving the book, this had become my daily routine. Close to 5 p.m., another service request came into the funeral home. I casually placed the book on the desk, tucked the headset into my pocket, and went to attend to the guest who was causing me to work overtime. It was a group of people from a rural area, led by several village officials. Behind them, a few farmers pushed a woman on a wheelbarrow. The woman's face was deathly pale, eyes wide open, her face and the corners of her mouth crusted with dried blood. One glance was enough to confirm she had passed. Professional decorum dictated we couldn't refer to them as dead, so we used the euphemism, passed. The men were chattering amongst themselves. Listening for a moment, I pieced together the situation. Apparently, the woman had been drying corn kernels on her rooftop when she'd accidentally fallen and died from the impact. Her husband had personally brought her to the funeral home, hoping I could restore her appearance to a presentable state. Her family from her maternal side was arriving the next day for the wake, and the deceased would be taken back home to lie in repose for 3 days before being brought back for cremation. It was unusual for people from rural areas to request restorative cosmetology. The fees were not insignificant. Indeed, some of the villagers who had accompanied them were expressing their doubts, saying it was unnecessary, that wiping the blood off with a cloth at home would suffice. But the deceased's husband had insisted. "Master, please help make my wife look beautiful. She didn't have an easy life with me. We were poor, and she was always frugal, never wanting to spend money on herself. Now that she's gone, I want her to look dignified, at least so her family doesn't think she was miserable with me." The husband, John, looked to be around 40 years old, unshaven and rough. His eyes were red-rimmed as he spoke. I felt a pang of sympathy, but his clothes were simple, stained with mud, and his rubber boots were splitting at the seams, the attire of someone just finished with farm work. His family's financial situation was likely modest. "I'll do my best," I said, "but the restoration costs are not cheap, at least $1,000. Out of consideration, I gave him a heads up. At the mention of $1,000, John's expression flickered slightly. "It's all right. As long as you can restore her to her best, even $2,000, I'll pay." After a moment's hesitation, John said through gritted teeth. Seeing his determination, I assured him I would do my utmost. I directed John to help lift his wife onto the preparation trolley, and I wheeled her into the preparation room. The red balloon, a memento from the earlier little girl, was still tied to the cabinet door. The splash of crimson in the sterile, white room felt jarring, a stark contrast of life and death. After positioning the deceased, looking at her wide, unblinking eyes, I murmured an apology and reached out to gently close them. However, as I turned to gather my tools, I glanced back and saw her eyes had reopened. Placing the tools down, my expression turned serious. Such occurrences weren't unheard of over the years. I lowered my voice, explaining that she would soon see her loved ones who had gone before, asking her to please close her eyes and release any anxieties. I even took a few incense sticks from the cabinet, lit them, and bowed in respect. Having done all this, I again reached out to close her eyes. I assumed that would be the end of it, but the next moment, they opened again. Looking at the blood vessels in her eyes, my breathing hitched. Generally, when a deceased person's eyes remain open, it's because they haven't seen someone they wished to see before passing. But I had been polite, offered incense, bowed, and explained the situation. Why was she so insistent? Never in my years of experience had I encountered a deceased person so resistant to closing their eyes. A faint unease began to creep into my heart. But work had to continue. I took a deep breath and began examining her body. The woman's clothes were disheveled, and the cuffs of her sleeves were torn, as if they had been through a struggle. Near the torn cuff, I noticed some bruising. This piqued my curiosity. Then, as I unfastened her clothing and exposed her body, I gasped, drawing in a sharp, shocked breath. Just then, the door burst open with a bang. John, the husband, rushed back in. "No one is allowed in the preparation room except me," I said, my face darkening. Being interrupted during preparation was my biggest pet peeve. Cough, sorry, I just wanted to say a couple more things," John mumbled, appearing flustered. "What is it you want to say?" I asked, my gaze flicking back to the body, my expression unreadable. I was hoping you could finish my wife's preparation today. I'd like to take her home sooner rather than later." "Which aspects of the preparation are you referring to?" I asked pointedly, my tone laced with veiled meaning. "Of course, the complete preparation," John lowered his head, avoiding my gaze. "All right, I understand. Now, please leave," I said coldly, maintaining a stony expression. John, sensing my displeasure, nodded quickly and retreated. Turning back to the woman's body, my face grew grim. The woman's body was covered in bruises, particularly around her neck, where fresh finger-shaped marks were visible. Her arms, thighs, back, and even her chest were marked with contusions. There was no way these injuries could have been caused by a simple fall. Any fool could see these were signs of a beating. The word domestic violence flashed in my mind. So much for appearances. My earlier sympathy for John evaporated. Anger rising, I strode to the doorway of the preparation room. The village officials and farmers were gone. Only John remained, pacing in the corridor, smoking. "Where did everyone else go?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Isn't it about to rain?" "They all went back to harvest the corn." "I'll just stay here and watch over things," John mumbled. "Your wife supposedly died from falling while drying corn. Why aren't you back there helping with the harvest?" I questioned sarcastically. "Keeping watch over my wife is more important." "That little bit of corn can wait," John replied in a low voice. His words only amplified my disgust. He was utterly hypocritical. My face hardened further, barely suppressing my mounting rage. "What about the injuries on her body?" I demanded, my voice tight. Normally, this would be none of my business, a private family matter. But the thought of domestic violence, combined with long-buried memories, stirred something deep within me. My fingers clenched so tightly they dug into my palm, yet I barely registered the pain. Unexpectedly, John suddenly dropped to his knees, with a thud. I knew it would be discovered. "It's my fault. I'm so sorry to her. I don't know what happened. I just had too much to drink. I don't know how I could have hit her. I deserve to die," he sobbed, slapping himself hard across the face. "Please, I beg you. Our child is only 10 years old. I don't want my child to know I hit his mother. Please help me cover up these injuries. I still have to take her back to show the relatives," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. The prepared, accusatory words I had ready dissolved. Why is it that people only realize the value of something after they've lost it? Thinking of the 10-year-old child, a wave of pity softened my anger. I began, hesitating. Now that my wife is gone, I know my regret is useless. I just want to raise my child properly. Please believe me, I'll never drink again," John continued, his voice thick with emotion. Looking at John's distraught state, and picturing the child, I bit back my anger and turned away. The deceased was gone, but the living remained. I reasoned that covering up the evidence for the sake of her child might be something she would have forgiven. "I hope you will treat your child well," I said, my voice strained. With that, I returned to the preparation table and began washing the body with antiseptic soap. As I cleansed, I massaged the stiff limbs to soften the rigor mortis, making it easier to dress her later. Midway through the washing, the bruises on the deceased woman's wrists became even more pronounced. I also noticed traces of blood in her nostrils and mouth. Suddenly, a passage from forensic case files flashed in my mind. Could she have hit her head in the fall? It was possible. Otherwise, what could have caused her death? Having finished washing the body, the bruises were even more glaring than before. I felt my hands tremble slightly. After cleansing the body, I began preparing to wash her face. Unexpectedly, I discovered faint palm-shaped marks on her face, previously obscured by the dried blood. John had truly been brutal. No wonder she couldn't rest in peace. Silently reciting a Buddhist prayer for peace, I suppressed my rising anger. My fingers then brushed against the back of the deceased's skull, encountering a slight indentation. It wasn't large, but the injury was distinct. It felt like a strike wound. Running my fingers over the area, I examined it carefully. There was also some swelling around it. Could this really be from a fall? What could she have fallen onto to cause such a peculiar injury? As I continued to examine it, my mind raced, trying to recall something. Suddenly, it clicked. I vaguely remembered a section in the anatomy textbook Daniel had given me, detailing the different characteristics of impact injuries versus strike injuries. According to the book, this type of injury was more likely caused by a blunt force strike. The specifics were hazy, but if I could just get my hands on that book, I could be certain. Could it be? A chilling possibility surfaced in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. Looking at the woman's still open eyes, I felt a cold dread wash over me. Glancing at my wristwatch, it was already past 7. Everyone else had likely finished their shifts and left. I decided I needed to find that book. If I didn't clarify this, a gnawing unease would consume me. Leaving the preparation room, John was no longer in the corridor. Reaching the office doorway, I saw John, to my surprise, rummaging through books on a desk. Everyone else had already left. The moment John looked up, his eyes were cold, holding a strange, unsettling quality. I instinctively recoiled a step, startled. When I looked again, John's expression had reverted to its previous cautious demeanor. "Oh, I was just bored, so I was just browsing," John said casually, indicating the book in his hand. "This book is quite interesting. I wonder whose it is?" He gestured with the book, which was, unmistakably, my forensic case files. "Oh, that book belongs to old Wang, at your workstation." "He's always been into those strange books," I lied, not wanting to reveal it was mine. "Are you out here now because my wife's preparation is finished?" John asked, dismissing the book with a shrug. "Not yet. I'm running low on materials. I just came out to get some, and also to use the restroom," I replied, avoiding his gaze. I calmly walked to the locker, grabbed some tissues, and subtly slipped my phone into my pocket. Then, from a nearby cabinet, I took some makeup supplies for the deceased. Even with my back turned to John, I could feel his eyes fixed on me. Supplies in hand, I headed to the restroom. Perched on the toilet seat, I pulled out my phone and started searching online for information about fall injuries versus blunt force injuries. To my surprise, I found relevant results. Generally, deaths caused by falls exhibited varying degrees of bleeding depending on the impact force, but they wouldn't typically present with such a distinct indentation. Irregular indentations or vertical, sunken wounds could occur if the person fell and struck a specific object. However, the indentation on this woman's skull was different. It wasn't a vertical, sunken wound. Recalling John's demeanor and the woman's injuries, a chilling realization dawned on me. I was almost certain the woman hadn't died from a fall. If it wasn't a fall, then John was the most likely culprit. She had been murdered. No, I had to call the police immediately. Just then, the restroom door creaked open. I quickly yelled, "What are you doing? This is the women's restroom." "Hey there, girl, sorry to bother you. I've got a bit of an emergency here." "Need your help," John said, stepping further into the restroom. "You can't just come into the women's restroom. Can't you wait for me to come out?" I protested, my heart pounding. Sorry, we country folk aren't too fussy about these things," John said dismissively. "I was just thinking, we still have some cured meat hanging at home. The corn might be lost, but the cured meat is valuable. Could I possibly borrow your phone to call my neighbor and ask them to help bring it in? It's about to rain, and that meat can't get wet. Could you just lend me your phone now?" John's words sent a wave of icy dread through me. Had he figured out something? Everyone else at the funeral home had left for the day. Only the security guard and I remained. A cold fear gripped me. The security guard, Lou, was stationed at the front entrance. Because the funeral home was in a remote suburban area, it was usually very quiet, and since the director was his uncle, Lou spent his shifts wearing headphones and watching videos on his phone. Even if I screamed at the top of my lungs, he probably wouldn't hear me. I was on my own. "Okay. Wait for me, just a minute," I said quickly. I frantically deleted my browsing history on my phone. Seeing John's feet right at the door crack, I almost extended my hand to pass him the phone through the gap, but at the last second, I pulled back and turned on my phone's Bluetooth. Then, I handed it to him. "Here, you can make your call." John took the phone. I couldn't tell if he actually made a call or not. Soon after, I came out of the restroom and walked quickly towards the office. I saw John sitting in my chair, still holding forensic case files, flipping through the pages. "What's wrong?" John asked, noticing me. He made no move to return the phone, or even mention it. "Can I have my phone back, please?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I put it in your drawer. You should get back to work. Don't want anyone calling and disturbing you later." His eyes were cold now, sending a shiver of danger down my spine. "All right then," I replied with forced lightness, then turned and headed back to my preparation room, closing the door behind me. Taking a few deep breaths, I pulled out my Bluetooth headset, intending to call for help. Thank goodness I was in the habit of listening to music with it. As I took the headset from its charging case, it blinked to life, and then I heard the words, "Connected." I waited a few seconds, everything seemed normal. Apparently, John hadn't noticed I had secretly connected to my phone via Bluetooth. I was immensely grateful for my phone's silent, vibration-free mode, and even more grateful for Daniel and his thoughtful gift. I used voice command to instruct the Bluetooth headset to call Daniel. I tried several times, but Daniel didn't answer. He must be busy. My anxiety was escalating. Just then, footsteps approached the door. I couldn't risk guessing if it was the security guard or John. What to do? What to do? My hair wasn't long enough to conceal the Bluetooth headset. The small preparation room offered no hiding places. The blinking light on the headset was impossible to miss. If John found it, I'd be done for. Who knew what he was capable of? Eliminating a witness? My eyes darted around frantically. Then, I saw it, the balloon. The little girl's red balloon. In an instant, a plan formed in my mind. I quickly detached the balloon, tied the Bluetooth headset to its string, and then, speaking into the headset, voice commanded, "Call Daniel." The footsteps were getting closer. The beep, 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 of the headset trying to connect felt like a death knell. Just as the footsteps reached the door, the call connected. "Hello?" Emily? Sorry, I was in a meeting and couldn't answer. Daniel's voice came through, a wave of relief washing over me. Just then, the door was kicked open with a loud bang. John stormed in, his eyes bloodshot, glaring at me. Why did you lie to me? Ah. Lie to you about what? Don't go making wild accusations. Calm down. I exclaimed, instinctively grabbing a small cuticle knife used for manicuring the deceased, and backing myself into a corner. That forensic case file book is yours. John snarled, his face contorted with rage as he advanced on me. No, it's not, I stammered, still trying to deny it, but he thrust my work ID at me. This was in the drawer where you were sitting. Your ID. And there's a long strand of hair in the book. Is old Wang a woman now? He was incandescent with fury, throwing the book and my ID at me. They struck me painfully. And why didn't you flush the toilet? Were you planning to call the police? John's voice was chillingly cold as he spat out the last question. Then why did you kill your wife? I screamed back, my hands trembling violently. If John decided to attack me, did I even have the strength to fight back? An eerie silence descended upon the room. So, you know everything after all. John's body shook. He turned and locked the door, then slumped to the floor, his voice hollow. I didn't mean for it to happen. Now that I was momentarily safe, I glanced upwards at the red balloon floating near the ceiling. The blinking light of the Bluetooth headset was still visible. Daniel must have heard everything, right? Please, hurry and come save me. It was just an accident. John leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on the floor, fumbling in his pocket. My adrenaline surged. Was he reaching for a weapon? I tensed, ready to fight for my life. But instead, John pulled out a pack of cigarettes. The pack was crumpled and unfamiliar, probably some cheap, low-grade brand. Actually, I didn't want this to happen. I really didn't mean to, he said, taking out a cigarette and lighting it with a cheap lighter. He inhaled deeply, his expression tinged with sorrow. I know you didn't mean to, I said, trying to sound conciliatory. Let's both just calm down. All I wanted to do was stall for time. As long as he didn't attack, he could wallow in his remorse for as long as he wanted. Listen to me, John pleaded. Really, I didn't want to kill her. I loved her very much. He choked up, glancing at his wife's body lying on the preparation table. If you don't mind, could you tell me about it? How much did you love her? What exactly happened? I ventured, trying to sound sympathetic. I hoped he would tell me his story, anything to buy more time until Daniel arrived with help. John was silent for a moment, his face obscured by the smoke. Then, he began to speak in a low, monotone voice. Last year, he had taken out a loan to lease a fish pond to start a fish farming business. But he lacked experience, and all the fish died. His fish farm venture went bankrupt, and he was left deeply in debt. Even though he was drowning in debt, he didn't want to deprive his wife and child. However, when his wife found out about the debt, she started to despise him, constantly scolding and belittling him, using it as an excuse to pick fights. John was consumed by anger and frustration, but also guilt and self-reproach. He couldn't bring himself to lash out at her, so he turned to alcohol. He started drinking more and more, becoming an alcoholic. Perhaps only when drunk could he escape the torment. One night, fueled by alcohol and provoked by his wife's nagging, he lost control and hit her for the first time. Once the barrier was broken, violence became easier. It happened again and again. Gradually, he couldn't distinguish between his sober and drunk states anymore. Sometimes, he thought, the violence was simply a release. Then, one day, John had drunk less than usual and returned home earlier. He noticed something amiss. His wife was on the phone, speaking in a flirtatious, cheerful tone. He crept closer and overheard enough to make his blood run cold. His wife was having an affair. She was arranging to meet her lover in the cornfield the next day. In that moment, John snapped. He lost all reason. He stormed into the house, grabbed his wife by the hair, and beat her mercilessly. But when he sobered up, remorse washed over him. He apologized to his wife, calling himself useless, unable to provide a better life for them, and admitting he shouldn't have laid a hand on her. Their child was only 10 years old. John couldn't bear the thought of his family falling apart. He tried everything to appease his wife, and eventually, they reconciled. But the peace was short-lived. Just when John thought his wife was settling down to rebuild their life, he discovered she was still in contact with that man. This time, John couldn't take it anymore. He lost control again, and violence erupted once more. But this time, in a drunken rage, he accidentally struck his wife with a rolling pin, killing her instantly. Panic seized him. He thought of his son, who would be home from school soon. He couldn't go to prison. So, he dragged his wife's body to the rooftop and pushed her off, making it look like an accidental fall. Then, he started shouting for help, attracting the neighbors. And that's how his wife became someone who died from a fall. After he finished speaking, silence hung heavy in the room between us. I calculated the time. Even with John's pauses, his insistence he hadn't meant to kill her, his declarations of love, and scattered complaints, the story wasn't particularly long. No more than 5 minutes had passed. I had no idea when Daniel would arrive, but I knew it would take longer than 5 minutes. I needed to find another way to stall. Just then, John turned his gaze towards me. My heart leaped into my throat. I quickly said, "You know I haven't called the police. If you let me go, I won't say a word about this." "No," he said, his voice flat. "You will call the police, because I killed someone." "No, I won't, please believe me," I pleaded, watching the madness in his eyes intensify. I tried to sound as reassuring as possible. "Don't think I'm stupid. You're saying that to my face now, but as soon as I leave, you'll call the police immediately," John exclaimed, his voice rising. He looked up and sighed. That's when he noticed the balloon and the headset. I saw confusion spread across his face. A moment later, he jumped up, grabbed the balloon string, and pulled the headset down. He stared at it for a few seconds, then comprehension dawned. "Damn it, what's this? Headphones? You were recording me. You dared to trick me," John roared, lunging at me. A sharp slap landed across my face. I was stunned, my ears ringing, my head buzzing. "You murderer. You'll get what's coming to you." Regaining my senses, I wildly waved the cuticle knife in my hand. I knew I must look like a madwoman, but anything was better than being a dead woman. In my flailing, I must have scratched John. He yelped in pain, then his voice turned menacing. "Now that I've killed you, no one will ever know." He seized the opportunity and kicked my hand. The knife flew from my grasp. The next moment, his hands were around my throat, squeezing with brutal force. "I'll kill you, then stage a fire. You and my wife will both be burned to ashes." "Who would ever know?" John hissed, his grip tightening, cutting off my air supply. My throat burned with pain, I was coughing uncontrollably, my vision blurring, head spinning. I tried to pry his hands off, but he was too strong. My fingers scrabbled uselessly at his arms, leaving only faint red marks. Slowly, my vision began to fade from lack of oxygen. Was this it? Was I going to die? Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the trolley holding his wife's body move. The trolley, with his wife's body on it, slowly rolled towards us, finally bumping into John's lower back. The momentum caused the body to shift, and as it did, her eyes seemed to fix on John, wide and filled with a look of venomous hatred. A chill ran through me, clearing the fog in my mind for a brief moment. John, startled by the impact, glanced back and saw his wife's open eyes. What are you doing?" John cried out in alarm. His grip on my throat loosened slightly. I seized the chance, broke free, and stumbled to the ground. Gasping for air, I scrambled away as John, momentarily paralyzed by the sight of his wife's corpse, remained frozen. I lunged for the door, flung it open, and bolted out into the corridor, driven only by the desperate need to escape. "Daniel, where are you? When will you get here?" I had barely run a few steps when the preparation room door burst open again, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind me. John was still chasing me. Just then, a deafening crash of thunder split the sky, followed by a downpour. Rain lashed down. As I ran, I shouted back, "It's pouring rain. Your fire plan is ruined. Why do you have to kill me too?" My voice cracked with sobs. "Then I'll make it look like you fell and died." John's voice, cold and resolute, reached me after a moment of silence. His words plunged my heart into despair. There was no room for negotiation. Bursting out of the building into the open air, I saw John had gained ground on me. I knew I couldn't outrun him. My only chance was to find somewhere to hide. Thankfully, I knew the layout of the funeral home grounds far better than John. I dashed around a corner and quickly ducked behind a meticulously sculpted juniper bush in the landscaping. Barely 2 seconds later, John rounded the corner. He paused for a split second, then, splashing through the puddles, charged off in the opposite direction. Taking my chance, I scrambled out from behind the bush and sprinted towards the security booth. If I survived this, I was definitely reporting Lou for dereliction of duty. I had only run a few steps when John's roar ripped through the rain-soaked air behind me. "Stop running! You can't escape!" I didn't reply, just ran harder, desperate to reach the security booth. But as I strained to see the security booth, my heart sank again. Lou, that useless. The security booth door was ajar, but the booth was completely empty. He had either gone to the restroom or simply abandoned his post altogether. Either way, it felt like a death sentence. A defenseless woman against a burly, seasoned farmer, I had no chance of winning. Was this really the end? Gritting my teeth, I sprinted past the security booth. Hiding inside was not a viable option. Even if I could lock the door, the fragile windows would be an easy entry point for John. "Hey, who are you?" Just then, Lou's voice startled me. Relief flooded through me. Looking back, I saw Lou staring at John. John, in turn, was taken aback by the unexpected voice. He clearly hadn't anticipated anyone else being here. "He's a murderer. Stop him!" I yelled, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Lou's face paled instantly at the word murderer. He was clearly terrified and showed no inclination to confront John. Instead, he slowly backed away, eyes fixed on John. "Don't mess around." John sneered, then charged forward, slamming into Lou. A skinny young man who spent his days playing video games was no match for John. Lou crumpled like a rag doll. It's over. Despair washed over me. Even if I ran now, how far could I possibly get? I was already on the verge of collapse, completely exhausted. I watched as John pinned Lou to the ground. Lou cried out in pain, then fell silent. I couldn't tell if he was alive or dead. In the rain, John slowly stood up. This time, I saw it clearly. He was holding a small knife, and his clothes were stained with a dark red substance. Had he killed Lou? Terror gripped me. John in the rain, head raised, looked like a vengeful ghost risen from hell. I turned and ran again, but the sound of footsteps behind me grew closer and closer. I hadn't run far before he tackled me to the ground. "Don't blame me," John growled, his voice cold. "Blame yourself for being nosy." John grabbed my ankle and began dragging me towards a dark, shadowy area by the side of the road. Being dragged along the wet ground, I felt not just fear, but utter despair. Once John had me, there was no escape. Survival instincts kicked in, forcing me to think clearly, despite the panic. Suddenly, I mustered all my strength. Using my core muscles, I twisted my body and kicked out with my free leg, aiming a powerful blow at John's body. John grunted in pain and released my ankle. I kicked again, knocking the knife from his other hand. Then, I scrambled to my feet and ran back towards the funeral home building, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. Daniel should be on his way. If I could get back inside and find somewhere to hide, maybe, just maybe, I had a sliver of hope. If Daniel didn't come, then there was no hope at all. With renewed determination, I ran back inside the building. But as I reached the corridor outside the preparation room, my foot slipped on the wet floor and I went down hard. No. Not now. To fall at such a crucial moment. Panic surged through me. Preparation is just preparation. Why did you have to be so nosy? John's figure loomed in my vision. He was no more than 10 meters away, the small knife in his hand glinting menacingly under the dim corridor lights. Looking at his murderous, contorted face, I could almost see myself being stabbed again and again. Just as he was about to reach me, a strange sound echoed from the preparation room. Both John and I froze. He was standing right at the preparation room door. He turned his head, and his entire body convulsed as if he had seen something horrific. "Wife," he gasped. Then, the trolley holding his wife's body rolled out of the preparation room, slamming into him with force. The body, propelled by the momentum, seemed to rebound, striking him again, knocking him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground, the corpse falling on top of him. John screamed. In the dim light, I glimpsed something glinting on his body, a knife, buried deep in his flesh. And the handle, it was positioned near the corpse's hand. Was it a miracle? Overwhelmed by terror and disbelief, I watched John thrash and scream, cursing his wife, before finally pushing the body off him. Only then did the realization hit me, I needed to run. Ignoring the searing pain in my ankle, I forced myself to my feet and fled towards the second floor. John's relentless footsteps pounded behind me, a chilling reminder of my impending doom. Was there really no escape? Suddenly, the wail of police sirens pierced the night. Hope surged through me. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, giving me a burst of energy. I sprinted towards the nearest window. On the road outside, flashing blue and red lights cut through the rain. Several police cars were speeding towards the funeral home. The sirens grew louder and louder. The pursuing footsteps behind me faltered, then, after a brief pause, accelerated again. He clearly intended to kill me before the police arrived. Yes, in my current condition, there was no way I could outrun him and reach the ground floor. I'd probably be caught on the staircase and then, stabbed again and again. "You can't escape," John's voice, filled with malice, echoed behind me. But a strange calm settled over me. I grasped the windowsill, turned to face John, who was advancing on me, a look of savage triumph on his face. I smiled, a defiant, mocking smile. He faltered, confusion clouding his expression, clearly not understanding my sudden confidence. But the next moment, his face contorted in terror as he lunged at me. But he was too late. I vaulted over the windowsill and jumped. The impact of hitting the ground from the second story sent a jolt of pain through my legs and hips. Fractured or broken? I didn't know. But I knew I was probably going to live. The headlights of the police cars were blinding me. John would have to be completely insane to rush out and try to slit my throat now. That would guarantee his capture. "Emily. Are you all right?" "It's Daniel." "Where's the suspect?" Looking up, I saw a police car and a dozen heavily armed officers. The man leading them looked familiar. He rushed towards me, taking off his own coat and draping it around my shivering form. "Why did it take you so long? The killer chased me for so long." "He's inside. He killed the security guard, Lou." Tears streamed down my face, finally releasing the pent-up terror. A dozen police officers, hearing my words, immediately stormed into the building, weapons drawn. Soon, paramedics arrived. I was well cared for. A female officer gave me dry clothes, and I sat in the warmth of a police car, wrapped in blankets, as Daniel. His face etched with worry, cleaned and bandaged my scrapes and bruises. He suspected my leg was fractured and needed to be examined at the hospital. Police officers, as protocol dictated, questioned me and took my statement. Others began searching the funeral home grounds. Near the corridor entrance, they found Lou, the security guard, injured and unconscious. It turned out Lou wasn't dead. He had gone to the restroom when he heard my screams and rushed to investigate. But he hadn't brought his baton or riot shield with him to the restroom. Completely outmatched by John, he was quickly subdued and stabbed once before passing out from fear. It was good to know he was alive. Although I wasn't particularly fond of Lou, hearing he was alive brought a wave of relief. With everything settled, I learned that Daniel, upon receiving my call, had immediately kept the line open and rushed to the criminal investigation unit meeting next door to the autopsy suite. The head detective, after listening to 10 seconds of the call, immediately broke up the meeting and mobilized the entire team. He personally led the team in his police car, the entire criminal investigation unit, 6 police cars in total, speeding towards the funeral home, sirens blaring. They had even alerted traffic police to clear a lane for them, all in a desperate race to reach me and, by sounding the sirens, hopefully scare John into fleeing and thus protecting my safety. After this ordeal, the funeral home director granted me a month of paid leave. John's wife's body, the female corpse, was taken into police custody. After a professional autopsy conducted by forensic pathologist Daniel, it was confirmed that the woman had died from homicide. The police issued an arrest warrant for John. He was apprehended shortly after. Daniel told me that when they went to arrest John, the villagers, armed with hoes and farm tools, blocked the village entrance, refusing to let the police in, claiming the police were framing an innocent man. However, John himself walked out of the village and confessed to killing his wife, allowing the police to take him into custody. No one knew why John suddenly confessed. Only the child was to be pitied. I attended the court hearing. I wanted to witness John's retribution. John appeared in court in handcuffs, gaunt and haggard, his face a mask of despair. The law would not wrong an innocent person, nor would it let a guilty person escape, I thought to myself. The woman could finally rest in peace. At the hearing, Daniel sat beside me and told me something strange. He had been the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy on the woman. Initially, during the examination, the woman's eyes had also refused to close. But after the examination was completed, and he had determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma, Daniel noticed that the woman's eyes had closed on their own, sometime without him realizing it. Perhaps her unblinking eyes were her way of crying out for justice. Then, I remembered the trolley bumping into John just as he was about to strangle me. Before starting any preparation work, I always made sure to lock the trolley's wheels. So, had she intervened to save me? Perhaps. Some things are better believed than disbelieved, but as a mortician, it's best to always maintain reverence for life. The end.